Welcome to this lesson on the book of Numbers. In Jewish Bible, it is called Midbar, which means in the wilderness. The book of Numbers is best divided into three sections. The first section covers chapters 1 through 10. And within those chapters, we see the order of the camp and the way it is arranged and the purpose of the arrangement. We see the vow of the Nazarite to be explained and what it entails, and God coming into the tabernacle. In the second section is chapters 11 through 25. And in this narrative, we see the first generation of people who were coming out of Egypt and some of the problems that Moses was having in dealing with this group of people, and God running out of patience with them as they rebelled against God's rules and laws a number of times and were full of many, many complaints. Also, towards the end of this section, we come to the episode where Moses sends 12 men into the Canaanite areas to spy out the land and see what the cities are like and what the land itself is like. During which time the people come in contact with the cultures of the Ammonites and the Moabites. And an interesting story about Balaam, who is a prophet who is hired to make a curse on the Israelites, but can only give them a blessing instead. It's an interesting and kind of fun story. The third section is chapters 26 through 36, which is to the end of the book of Numbers. And the previous generation, the first generation brought out of Egypt, is now passed away from a number of different events, and the new younger generation is coming into their maturity. And so there is a census taken, and a couple of battles take place, more like skirmishes, I think. And cities of refuge are delegated, and we are at that point preparing to enter into the land of Canaan, or the promised land. So those are the three divisions within the book of Numbers. The plots that goes through this book are really basic, moving from Mount Sinai, which is where they have been camped for this first year. And now we're going to move through the desert toward the borderland of Moab. The Exodus generation, the ones that came out of Egypt, are given way to the new younger generation who replaces them. And the camp itself and the people are preparing to enter Canaan, or the promised land. So to begin with, there has to be some form of organization. So the first part of Numbers takes a census of the males who are eligible for military, and numbers are counted by groups and tribes and clans to come up with a final number of military age men. So that is part of the reason for taking the census. And the other is that this is in the book of Numbers, it's an intense cycle of instruction. So God, through Moses, instructing the people. So it's 1 year since they'd come out of Egypt, but the activities in chapters 1 through 10 that are being described actually take place within about a 3-day period. So the camp is organized and is prepared to move forward to the promised land with these final instructions. Interestingly, the language used to describe the military units and the placement of the people is derived from what was used by the Persian military, such as the ranking, placement, banners, and insignias. This would support the priestly tradition of writing these accounts following the return from the Babylonian exile, because it is the Persians who were in control and had their empire that allowed the Jews to return to Judah or Jerusalem and the surrounding country area. So numbers are kind of magic in the Old Testament. We've come across a lot of numbers that seem unrealistic or just don't seem to be like we count things in modern times. So in many ways, numbering was magical in the ancient world. And we can remember when we think back on Exodus and Genesis, how numbers were portrayed and they were played with to make a point. So in numbers, we have these same kind of problems when we're counting the people from the tribes. So for example, the number of males for each tribe is extremely large. Remember, we are counting those who are at ability for military duty. So the total of the census in the book of Numbers, chapter 1, is 603,550 males over 20 years of age. The age they were counting was 20 to 50, so they would be physically able to go to war. So some problems arise when attempts are made to interpret these census numbers literally as representing the number of people migrating from Egypt to Canaan. So we're not even counting women, children, and servants. So the number of males would require a total population combined of over 2 million people in the Sinai Peninsula. So many people would overwhelm the environment of the Sinai. And this large total conflicts with other traditions in which the number of fighting males during Israel's tribal period is significantly less. It is listed as around 40,000 males able to go to war in the book of Judges, chapter 5. The census, again, does not include women, servants, and children, but we are basing this total number of people on the counting that was taken of the male population plus families. Another suggestion about how these numbers might be, how they might have come up with these numbers is there's an instance of what we call gematria. That's a process where you evaluate each letter of the alphabet with a numerical worth. So you assign each alphabetical letter with a value. George Forer has noted that the numerical value of the Hebrew phrase sons of Israel is 603, which then multiplied by 1,000 nears this figure in Numbers chapter 1 of over 600,000 people. The figure 603,551 can also be achieved when the numerical value of the Hebrew phrase, all the heads, is included. So different letters of the Hebrew alphabet had different value as far as number value. The first 10 chapters of Numbers is mostly priestly material. The duties of the Levites are detailed at some great length. There's a big emphasis on the guarding of the tabernacle entrance by the Levites. The consecration of the Levites takes place and their family clans and duties are outlined. A description is given in Exodus as well as here in Numbers of what the high priest would wear. So here is a photo or a picture depicting some of the clothing that would be worn by the high priest. So it's quite elaborate, quite fancy, very powerful looking, person in a I guess we say you are, how you dress is how you present yourself. And this is to present yourself as being set apart for a specific job of being the high priest. On the breastplate, there is a stone symbolizing each one of the tribes of Israel. There's also another chart which I didn't put up here, but there is a chart which shows which animal represents each tribe of Israel as well. But in Exodus 28, it gives a description of how these stones are to be set in a breastplate and worn by the priest. So if we go back one slide, and you can see right here in the center his breastplate that he wears, and it's over his shoulders, and there's also two onyx stones on his shoulders. So special attention is given to the arrangement of the tribes around the tabernacle in a rectangular shape. The census of military-age men and Levites are taken separately. So the census of the Levites results in them being consecrated to represent all firstborn sons of Israel. They are placed near the temple as guards. So their encampments are closest to the temple, and the other tribes are around further away. The Levites were known for being violent because of their action following the rape of Dinah back in the latter chapters of Genesis. We read that story. And the slaying of the 3,000 after the golden calf incident. The Levites slayed 3,000 people. The violence is cited as the reason that the Levites did not receive a land allotment in Canaan. Here's an outline of the camp. You can see that there are 12 tribes around the outside. Remember that 2 of those tribes are actually the sons of Joseph. That would be Manasseh and Ephraim over here. And you can see how large each one of the tribes were added all together. It's quite a large number of people. And then, of course, the Levites are in their camps on 3 sides. And Aaron and Moses are on this side by the entrance. Rituals are very important because the people are involved in preparing the camp for God's presence. The Passover marked 1 year in the wilderness following the Exodus. During this time, God has been working to make the people holy. That is, remember, holy means to be set apart for his purpose. From Exodus chapter 19 all the way through Numbers chapter 10, for a total of 56 chapters, the theme has been making the people ready for the presence of Yahweh to become living in the midst of them in the tabernacle. Festivals and celebrations are to teach the people and the future generations about how God has been involved in the lives of Israel. They are a way to connect to God through tangible activities and verbal professions of faith. The first steps of preparation include the Passover celebration described in chapter 19. So for the second Passover, it says, quote, "A year after Israel's departure from Egypt, the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai. In the first month of that year, he said, 'Tell the Israelites to celebrate the Passover at the prescribed time at twilight on the 14th day of the first month. Be sure to follow all my decrees and regulations concerning this celebration.'" Also, during this time, a question of what happens for those people who are outside of the camp because they are unclean for some reason. Maybe they had recently handled a death of a family member, or possibly they had a skin condition, any number of reasons for which people were in isolation outside of the camp for a period of time. And Moses was concerned about what, when, and where, and how these people would be able to celebrate the Passover. So God spoke to Moses and made a provision for the people who were outside of the camp that they could celebrate the Passover at 1 month later, which most reasons for being outside of the camp usually involved about a 7-day isolation. So this would allow for people to finish out their whatever reason they were ritually outside of the camp, and be able to come back in and have another celebration for just those people alone, which was a pretty nice accommodation, I think. In this first set of chapters, also in Numbers 6, we have a new mention of the Nazirite laws. The Lord said to Moses, "Give the following instructions to the people of Israel. If any one of the people, either men or women, take the special vow of a Nazirite." So a Nazirite sets themselves apart for a period of time, and it can be anywhere from a short period of time to a lifetime. But only 2 people we know of in the Bible that had a lifetime commitment to being Nazirites were Samson, and we know what happened to him in the end, and Samuel the prophet, who is the one who, for the very first time, anoints David to be the king of Israel. So a Nazirite is not a priest, and they are also not a Levite. Taking the vow of a Nazirite is a way for a lay person to serve in the tabernacle, excluding the inner sanctuaries. A Levite is born into the priestly covenant, but a Nazirite is a convert. In this way, a Nazirite is a model for a Gentile in the New Testament who is brought into faith through a conversion. So it's not to say that they're not under the covenant already of the whole covenant of Israel, but this is a special way for them to serve in a semi-priestly capacity within the temple or the tabernacle. The Israelites then leave Sinai in chapter 10, the second year after Israel's departure from Egypt. On the 20th day of the second month, the cloud lifted from the tabernacle of the covenant. So the Israelites set out from the wilderness of Sinai and traveled on from place to place until the cloud stopped in the wilderness of Paran. So now they are on the move. They are on the way to the promised land. Silver trumpets is kind of interesting. Just before they were leaving Sinai, Moses instructed them to make 2 silver trumpets to be used to call the groups to marching order to be able to move forward. And then verse 35, it says, and when the ark set out, Moses would shout, arise, O Lord, and let your enemies be scattered. Let them flee before you. And then when the ark was set down, he would say, return, O Lord, to the countless thousands of Israel. Numbers is all about a life of faith. It is a journey. Israel has no place or land to call their own at this time. In the process of the journey, the transition to a new generation is key to developing the faith to be God's chosen people. The old generation complains of hardships as soon as the journey resumes from Mount Sinai toward Mount Hor. The complaints of lack of water and food are similar to the complaints when they first left Egypt. But even Aaron and Miriam complained to Moses this time. So change is difficult for most people. Combining change and in a wilderness together, it's a lot to process. So maybe, hardship is something to complain about at this time. Here's a great number of the complaints. There are multiple times where water and food are complained about. It wasn't necessarily that they didn't have food and water, but sometimes it was that they didn't like the food that they had. They were getting tired of it. In particular, they wanted some fresh meat. They were tired of the quail or of the manna. And then I think this is when God sends a great flock of quails so that they can eat so much that they actually get sick from it. And then there are many complaints against the new rituals and laws that are going to be instated. And then they complained about the news that was brought by the spies Moses sent into the land of Canaan to see what it was going to be like. And they complained about Moses's leadership. And they even tried to usurp his leadership. And they complained against or went against their instructions not to enter Canaan after the complaints about the spies bringing back partially good news and partially bad news. Which do you want first, the good news or the bad news? So when Aaron and Miriam complained against Moses, this is what God said to them. He called them to the front of the tabernacle where he could speak directly to them. And this is what he said. Now listen to what I say. If there were prophets among you, I, the Lord, would reveal myself in visions. I would speak to them in dreams, but not with my servant Moses. Of all of my house, he is the one I trust. I speak to him face to face, clearly, and not in riddles. He sees the Lord as he is. So why were you not afraid to criticize my servant Moses? Kind of like, how dare you when he's the one I have chosen? How dare you criticize him? In chapter 14, the people test the patience of God to the point that he's about to destroy them once again, as prior at the incident of the golden calf. The people plot to choose a new leader after the report of the spies who returned from Canaan. So just as like following the golden calf story, Moses intercedes on behalf of the people with a very beautiful speech in verses 14 through 19 of chapter 14. So we're sitting on the edge of the promised land. We've gone all the way from Egypt down to Mount Sinai, and now we are on our way, and we're right here in this area. And the first encounter they have is with the Amorites. And then the spies are sent into this area to just to check it out, see what's there, what are the people like, and so on. So they come back saying, some of the people are like giants. They are so large, there's no way we can fight against them. And the other two, Caleb and Joshua, say that this is not true. God is on our side. We can go and we will master the people within the land. Then they also say the land is full of richness. In other words, the phrase a land of milk and honey means a land that is very fertile. It is full of grazing land. It is full of cropland. It is full of trees. It is full of things that you need to survive and have a very good economy. So Caleb and Joshua are positive. That's 2 out of the 12 spies. 10 are negative and say that they fear that they could not overcome the people of the land. So it shows a lack of faith. So we're standing right on the edge where the red arrow is. Here's another way of looking at it a little differently. It is still the same area, maybe just stretched out a little bit and not quite as much detail. They are a rebellious people. So following this, they once again rebel and try to enter Canaan without the presence of God among them. The attempt to conquer fails. God does forgive them, but with the caveat that not one of this generation will enter the promised land. From here, they are set to wander. In Numbers 15 and 16, those 2 chapters, God gives some ritual laws, and several Levite priests try to replace Moses as the intercessor to God. The result is a plague, in which this time it is Aaron who intercedes and stops the plague. Now, it took 2 years, or they're in their 2nd year, to get to the edge of Canaan, and they would be set to enter. But all these rebellions delay the entrance into Canaan. And so time passes until the older generation of people pass away. So all these incidents with people dying from plague or various other things along the way are part of the lessening of the numbers of the first generation. And in chapter 20, there is a lack of water in the wilderness of Zin. Moses is instructed to speak to the rock, but instead he loses his patience and he strikes the rock. Water is released, but the Lord is displeased by Moses not obeying the command as it was directed to him. I have to say, I think Moses has had a remarkable amount of patience, but he did not follow the instructions, and unfortunately for him, there was to be reckoning for this action. In chapter 21, the rebellion is over food and water, and it brings on a plague of serpents. Moses is instructed to make a serpent of bronze and to hold it high. Those who look at it have protection from the serpents. Bronze serpents were used and found throughout the ancient Near East in their temples. It is a most puzzling story for me. Could it represent Christ being raised up on a cross? Or is it idolatry in some fashion? I'm not sure. But I thought that was an interesting story in chapter 21. And it did I kind of leaned towards the idea. I like the idea of it being Christ raised up on the cross to represent healing. Threats to Israel at this time. First is Moab. In Numbers chapter 22, it describes two different threats to Israel. The first is Moab, and the king is Balak, and he desires to conjure up a curse on Israel. So he summons Balaam. So Balaam has to come from quite a distance. It's up in the area that would probably today be Syria. So Balaam is in a cycle of stories that illustrates that God will protect and have power even at times when Israel is totally unaware of it. So the second external threat to Israel involves an active participation in worshiping other gods, and also in mixing with the women of another people, actually probably in a more of a religious worship thing called temple prostitution. As a result, the worship of the golden calf at Mount Sinai is repeated on the plains of Moab with the same consequences for the Israelites. So the reason King Balak and the Moabites fear Israel is twofold. Israel's power to wage war is evident from its defeat of the Amorites that they met earlier. The more explicit reason, however, is the size of Israel's population. Balak's speech to the Midianites, whom he's speaking with, I guess kind of like maybe making a contract with, underscores the fact. He fears the impact that so many Israelites will have on the environment of the country. And this is what he says. The king of Moab said to the elders of Midian, whom he's conferring with, "This mob will devour everything in sight like an ox devours grass in the field." The fertility of Israel fulfills one of two divine promises to the ancestors. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? The population would grow. In Genesis 12, we heard the promise of the number of descendants more than the stars in the sky, and of land in Genesis chapter 16. At the outset of chapter 22, the second generation has once again become numerous. So just as the first generation had become in Egypt, the Israelites' fertility in the second generation creates the same dread in the Moabites that the first generation had created in the Egyptians. There's so many of them, they will overrun us. So Balaam, the prophet, seems to have some kind of knowledge of Yahweh, even though he has no knowledge of Israel. Balaam consults Yahweh on what he is to do when King Balak's servants arrive to get him. So nowhere in God's reply to Balaam is Israel referred to by name, nor are they called God's people. Instead, God tells Balaam that he cannot curse the people because they are blessed. Balak demands 3 times that a curse be put on Israel, but Balaam the prophet is unable to perform the curse and instead gives a blessing. And there's an interesting story along the way where Balaam is going to meet King Balak, and on the way his donkey decides that he cannot go any further because an angel of the Lord is standing in the way. Balaam cannot see it, but the donkey can, and Balaam beats his donkey, and the donkey talks to him. "Am I not your donkey who has been faithful to you all these years?" It's a really cute story. So the fertility of Israel is a direct result of God's blessing. God states this to Balaam explicitly. Balak, the king, requests that Balaam, the prophet, curse the Israelites because cursing, which is the opposite of blessing, disrupts that fertility. The cursed earth in Genesis 3, after leaving the Garden of Eden, for example, is transformed from a fertile garden into the ground that brings forth thorns and thistles. So the objective power of cursing and blessing is central to this story. King Balak hopes that having Israel cursed will weaken Israel, allowing him to drive them from the land. But there has to come a point where there's no return in rebellion. In chapter 25, worshiping Baal, a foreign god, Baal of Peor, is the very last straw. Even as some success is being made towards the promised land, the Israelites now worship a foreign deity. The grandson of Aaron slays 2 men, and a plague kills the last of the generation that came out of Egypt. So this then sparks the need for a new census of the new generation, and that begins in chapter 26. So out with the old and in with the new. A new census and a new generation replace the rebellious first generation. In chapter 26, verses 3, it says, "So there on the plains of Moab, beside the Jordan River, across from Jericho, Moses and Eleazar the priest issued these instructions to the leaders of Israel. List all the men of Israel 20 years old and older, just as the Lord commanded Moses." So they are so close. They are on the plains of Moab, looking across into Canaan. They can see the city of Jericho, and they are unable to enter the land. This gives an opportunity to reteach the new generation and to renew the laws and rituals, to remind them what they are, what their covenant duties are, what their ritual duties are. And so it's a time for reinstruction. With the new generation comes the opportunity to teach the laws and rituals. A new ritual calendar and some vows are instituted at this time. God works through law and promise to uphold and promote a bountiful life. There's new leadership as well. We're passing the torch of leadership, and that can be complex. The priestly leadership is passed through the Levites, beginning with Aaron to his son Eleazar and his grandson Phineas, I think his name was. And so that seems reasonable. It was promised that the Levites would be, the priestly tribe from the beginning. But the leadership of Moses is a little different. It did not end up passing through to his son. Instead, the torch of leadership was passed over to Joshua. And later on, once Joshua is passing, it goes into a group of people that we call the judges. So it's not hereditary at this time, the leadership of the people. Okay. In other words, they don't have any kings yet. The wilderness journey. So this Numbers records a difficult journey, both physically and spiritually, for Israel. The hardships of desert life, the opposition of tribes reminds the people that a life of faith is not an easy path. God leads the way through scarcity, hostility, from bondage to freedom, and the wildness of the journey to a new land of promise. But no one said it would ever be without thorns. The divine blessings flow through the Levites to the people through their liturgies and rituals that are established by God. It is through worshipful relationship that with God that blessings, forgiveness, and favor are poured out onto the people. So through the liturgies and rituals, this is how people are involved in worship. This is how they are involved in building a relationship with God. And it is through that relationship that they receive blessings. This is a blessing that the Lord gave to Moses to say over the people. And it should probably sound familiar to you if you've been in churches at all. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell Aaron and his sons to bless the people of Israel with this special blessing. May the Lord bless you and protect you. May the Lord smile on you and be gracious to you. May the Lord show you his favor and give you his peace. Whenever Aaron and his sons bless the people of Israel in my name, I myself will bless them." It's a beautiful blessing. In the modern English version, you may have heard this: "The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift his countenance upon you and give you peace." This is the one I am most familiar with. From this lesson on the book of Numbers, I referred to the Jewish Study Bible frequently. I found it very helpful in understanding the book of Numbers. And towards the end of the study, I came across this quote, and I thought that it was appropriate to share it. There's a priestly agenda of laws and rituals in Numbers with the object to promote divine endorsement. This quote here seems to sum it up. Questions of historicity are ancillary to such approaches. Whether the traditions are real, invented, or a combination of both matters little in the creation of the people's collective memory. And this is what we have in the books of the Pentateuch. We have a collective memory of ancient Israel. And some things may be invented, some things may be a combination of both real and invented, some things may be embellishment, but definitely there are things that are real, and the faith of the people is built around all of these things. For next week, I recommend that we read Deuteronomy chapter 6. It has been said that if you read the whole book of Deuteronomy, that you have the entire background for the beliefs of the nation of Israel. But I won't ask you to read the whole book. There are quite a few chapters, but I would like you to please read Deuteronomy chapter 6. So as we move into Deuteronomy, many of the laws in the two previous books of Exodus and Numbers will be repeated. We will take up the assignment at the end of Numbers to roll over into Deuteronomy, and that would be the description of refuge cities, the allotment of the land, some early battles that the people encountered, and the final words of Moses to the Israelites. Moses is given a view of the promised land, just as Abraham had been given a view of Canaan years before. and the future generations would now call their own. For closing, I wanted to share this poem. Open unto me light for my darkness. Open unto me courage for my fear. Open unto me hope for my despair. Open unto me peace for my turmoil. Open unto me joy for my sorrow. Open unto me strength for my weakness. Open unto me wisdom for my confusion. Open unto me forgiveness for my sins. Open unto me love for my hates. Open unto me thyself for myself. Lord, Lord, open unto me. Amen. Beautiful prayer. And finally, I cannot leave you without a little bit of humor for the week. So our special for the week has been manna. It is in a smooth reduction. It is in a frosty. It is in, let's see, banana pudding. What else can we put it in? It is a collection of manna, and it is the best food available in the desert for the Israelites. Have a great week. Come back next time and listen to a few slides that I share about the book of Deuteronomy.